Adam Taxin with Daniel Greenfield, whose columns can be found at sultankanish.blogspot.com. Today we're talking about his latest column, which is The Nature of the Disease. Daniel, welcome. First of all, tell us what you mean by the nature of the disease, the term, and where it fits in with healthcare.
Well, when you try to diagnose an illness, a problem, then you have to deal with that by understanding the nature of the disease. It's not that different in politics or in any other form of human affairs where you have to understand what exactly is the nature of the disease. What is the pathology of it? Why is there pain and suffering as a result? And when we apply that model to politics, we have a whole other perspective, in this case particularly with Obamacare, which is the topic of the article.
And it's always fun to bring up Cuba because of the affection leftists like, as you mentioned, Michael Moore and Steven Spielberg bring it up as some shining example. I'll let you do the honors of explaining how the latest news from Cuba and their health care and their public health situation right now.
Well, Cuba, the shining future of socialism, the wonderful island utopia that shows us where we're headed in the future, the place where famous celebrities like to go and complain about how bad American healthcare is, now has a major outbreak of cholera, which is really, it's a triumphant achievement for socialist healthcare.
You raise an interesting point in there about what socialist healthcare does in terms of a shift from diagnosis to prevention and basically gimmicks as cost-cutting measures. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, we had a recent example of that with Bloomberg banning large sodas, because the thinking is, well, we won't need to spend that much money on feeding heart attacks if we just start banning people from drinking large sodas. It's these prevention gimmicks, prevention and education. We're going to control people and then make it so that they're not sick, and then we won't have to pay for the health care. Why? Because we know that we can't afford to pay for their health care anyway, and that's the real upshot of it.
And it's a way to blame it on them. You know, some people are actually born fat, but whenever you do that, and I think you mentioned this in the column, you know, it's as if it's their own fault.
There's no serious attempt to actually help people. It's an attempt to control people, and controlling people is itself a form of insecurity. It says that the system can't do its job, so it's going to try and force people to make the job easier for the system.
One thing I like, as you probably realize, Daniel, from doing enough of these with me by now, is to teach the kind of history that is not taught very well in schools. And you make a reference to agriculture in the old Soviet Union and how that fits in with this issue. Can you just teach us a little bit right now?
Sure. The overall point here is that when the government collectivizes something, when it takes control over it, the end result is the same process again. The system, the actual production completely collapses. Meanwhile, everybody up the food chain continues deceiving and lying about it. Now, in the Soviet Union, their big focus was agriculture, collectivization, collective farms, and at the one time, the Ukraine and Russian territories were producing huge amounts of wheat. Toward the end, the Soviet Union had gone deep into debt to the United States just to buy food from the United States, which is how bad it had gotten. But at the same time, the politicians were reporting that we have a 98% successful harvest. And this applies all the way down. It applies not just to agriculture, it applies to healthcare, it applies to education, it applies to everything.
It's amazing to think about that in terms of the Soviet Union, given how big the country is and how much landmass there was for growing grain. You know, just the Ukraine, some of the best grain growing land in the world. When you think about how big and relatively underpopulated it is, and that it couldn't feed itself, amazing to me. Just amazing.
It is, but when you give people absolutely no motivation, and when you completely break the system that's supposed to produce something, then you end up with Africa, which is what the Soviet Union started to become.
Yeah, and you, of course, compare it to Japan, a country with pretty poor resources, but a lot of human capital. But we're probably digressing a little bit here. It seems that your best point can be summarized in 2 quick sentences. You say, why is Cuba's healthcare system superior? Because it's socialist. In other words, truth and a fair evaluation is just not relevant. It's just lying, like pretending things are okay when they're not. That's your basic point here, right?
Yes. Says that this thing is better. Why is it better? Because it's better. That's the essential socialist argument. Socialism is shinier, it's more modern, it's more progressive. They can't really but their argument is everybody knows it better. Except when the cholera kicks in.
Yeah. Well, we have something to look forward to over here in a few years. Okay, the column is The Nature of the Disease. I've been talking to Daniel Greenfield, whose columns can be found at sultankanish.blogspot.com. Daniel, thanks as always.
Good.